Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works. I am Bill Correll, and I am joined by my longtime partnerette, Jan Jeremias, who I dearly love. And this week, we're also joined by Dave Roberts. We'll refresh you on the format and what we do here on a weekly basis. We get together and we make stuff up. Pretty much have a conversation about whatever hits us, but the idea is to stay somewhere in the empowerment ballpark. We may drift from it from time to time, but we do manage to get back there somehow before the hour is up. But with that said, we're just talking about the weather. And I really love that old saying. It was either Will Rogers or Mark Twain who said, everybody's complaining about it, but nobody's doing anything to change it, right? So that's what life seems like sometimes, doesn't it? Like you're at the mercy of whatever weather or whatever storm shows up, and it alters your idea of what you thought your day was going to be. And I'm really pleased to say that where I am at the moment, I was about 2,000 miles away from both Jan and Dave, because I'm in the Mile High City in Denver, Colorado. And the weather here is perfectly fine. So with that said, I'm rarely on this end of the good weather, so I am gloating over that a little bit, guys. So I hope you won't hold that against me.
Not at all.
No.
So, topic of conversation for this week. Open for suggestions. Is there anything that's top of the mind, or maybe a recent conversation that you had with somebody else that might bear fleshing out a little bit?
Off the top of my head, I can't. There's several things that are coming to my head, but not one that is like percolating as a must see, as a must talk about topic.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do then. I will toss out. I had a lovely dinner last night with my daughter's husband's family. He's got a bunch of brothers that are here in Denver, Colorado. There were 3 of them that showed up for dinner with us last night. Actually, a fourth came with his 10-year spouse, and we just talked about everything under the sun. And funny enough, I mean, here's what you don't know about them: they're all half Navajo. So the topics of conversation in the past a lot of times have had something to do with current events or what have you. Not last night. Last night we were eating good sushi together, having a great time. And the neat part of it is that most of them are teetotalers. They don't even drink. They didn't have a beer or anything like that. I did. I'm on vacation. That's what I do when I'm on vacation. So the topic of conversation from time to time was talking more about some folks that they had lost in the family. So I know the 3 of us have spent a lot of time talking about and getting into conversations having to do with loss and grief and that sort of thing. I'm not advocating for that this morning. However, they spent all the time really sharing joyous memories. And it was a wonderful way to spend 3 hours. We sat down there literally at about 4:30, 4:45, and we left there at 8:00. And nobody wanted to leave. It was just that great a conversation.
Yeah, I think being able to share and connect the memories is a way that one of the ways that we transform the relationships with our loved ones, create those continued bonds, keep them in our hearts, keep them alive. And I think it's great that we can do that. I think in early grief, kind of memories are like a blessing and a curse. We experience in them that reminds us of what or who we lost. But then in later grief, with the people that I've lost, the memories that I've experienced remind me of who I have.
Right. Yeah, there
I
was a neat transformation in the conversation where we went from talking about loved ones who had passed during COVID and before that into, oh, by the way, how's so and so doing down on the res,
Mhm.
or getting updated on the folks that weren't there that we all know, like, and love. Because Ty is one of 11 children in his family. So there's lots of folks to talk about. All good stuff.
I think for me, I mean, I look at my personal experience, and it happens to be that yesterday was my dad's birthday. So, my dad passed away, and this coming week is the anniversary of his passing. So he's been on my mind a lot anyway. And so
Yeah.
yesterday, as I got up and I thought about it and I looked at his picture. I actually lit a candle and wished him a happy birthday and everything. And some of the memories came back. And I think it doesn't bother me that I still have a tinge of that sadness or kind of like those things because I kind of like just feel like I'm kind of prepared for it now, I guess is a good way to put it. It's kind of
Yes.
like I feel like I'm going to revisit those memories. And even though they're happy memories or whatever they are, it's kind of just realizing that there's nothing wrong with me if I get a tinge sad
No.
because of that. And I think that that's really been kind of normalized it all for me because I used to, at points in my life, I always felt like, oh, okay, well, I should be over that already. And it shouldn't bother me and I shouldn't get sad and I should move on. And getting sad meant I wasn't moving on, that I was still kind of stuck. And then I realized that's so for me, anyways, it was, and the people I speak to, that's so not true. That
Right.
I'm like, it's okay. Like
Yeah.
it was perfectly fine. I mean, it was what it was. I was glad that I did that. And I kind of had that honoring of him. And I did think about him. And I wouldn't have pushed that away either, like Dave shared. I mean, that's a way for me to keep him alive in my heart.
But,
But yeah, go ahead.
no, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Jan.
No, go ahead, please.
But the thing is that one of the myths about grief, and this has been perpetuated since probably since Kubler Ross's Stages of Grief came out, which as everybody knows, she developed the stages of grief to give individuals at the end of life a vocabulary for their end of life journey. And many in Western society extrapolated the end of life journeys to how we grieve, which was implied that it should be linear, time limited. After 6 months to a year, we should, bury our grief and move on and as if nothing happened, which is farthest from the truth because every loss that we experience changes not only the physical landscape, but our emotional and assumptive landscape of our lives. And each loss requires us to reevaluate those priorities and beliefs. The, and I believe grief is going to manifest throughout our life cycle at any time, depending on what's happening at that particular moment. And if we look at life in general, not everybody is happy or joyful 24/7. A lot of people would like to have you think they are, but in reality, life is in the genuineness of an individual, and life is the microcosm of life is like a microcosm of grief. There's going to be happy moments, there's going to be sad moments, there's going to be confusing moments, but it all works. It all makes us who we are, and every emotion we have is in service to us and anybody else who we are vulnerable enough to manifest to, because it may make them aware and make us aware of hidden parts of ourselves that would normally not come to the surface if we didn't embrace genuineness, particularly after loss. Now, for me, the most mind altering and life altering loss was, I call it the transition of my daughter Janine to a new existence over 20, it's going to be 22 years, March 1st. Would I have preferred least life altering tragedy to give me the perspective shift and understand the perspectives that I've embraced that have allowed me to find peace? Absolutely. But as I've mentioned on my podcast and other podcasts, we don't have challenges. We don't have control over the challenges that befall us, only how we respond to those challenges. So then getting to Bill's earlier thing about, I think you might have alluded to maybe how much control do we really have over stuff. We have little control, if no control over anything. Control is an illusion. Once I learned that I had control over nothing in my life became more manageable. But I had to relinquish control to have control, if that makes sense.
And I think once we have control, life stops
Oh yeah.
because
And
Or
that,
then
the
there,
only thing you have control over is to stop breathing.
yeah.
right, because then all of a sudden you're like, there's no flexibility and no flow and no creativity. So all of a sudden, like life is empty. Like
Well, the way I used to say it, Jan, was what you're envisioning of control would mean in your life is like being on a morphine drip. Okay, quite frankly, it's just not going to be your life any longer, and it's not possible. So why would you be acting as if all of your actions are getting you closer to a state of living that gets you further from living? So, and when you were talking earlier, Dave, about the non-linearity of grief, I've kind of taken to using, a simile that it's like menopause. It's here, until as long as it's here, until it's not here. Okay,
Mhm.
and there's really no shortcut. There's no like you can buy books on it because they're out there, but I really am um, not really all that interested in prescribed living and prescribed handling of certain things in your life. If there are general guidelines, that the message, if it's woven through it, as Jan is saying, is whatever you're feeling, however you're getting through it, it's perfectly normal. No two people do it the same way. So never compare yourself to another's level of grief. And a good friend once said that after he lost his wife, he was speaking with a woman who he was a public speaker, and after was done speaking, the woman came up and shared the trauma of losing her dog. And his thought was, he didn't act on this, but at the time, his thought was, how dare she equate the loss of her dog with my loss of my wife? Later on, it finally hit him that people's grief is genuine and deep, and that part is our humanness. She was going to her place where she felt the least powerful and least in charge, sharing that with him to find some commonality there. And he said, I wish I'd known her name because I felt like going and looking her up and apologizing to her. Not how I behaved, but how I listened.
Well, and tragedy is defined differently for everybody. For an individual, the loss of a pet can be as traumatic as the loss of a human because, let's say, for example, that pet was a service animal. Not only does that pet represent the loss of a companion, it represents the loss of independence. If the person lived alone or it's a couple that couldn't conceive or couldn't have children, though they become very uniquely bonded to their pets and they look at their pets as
Yes.
if they are one of the family. So for me, it's like, what is the significance of the relationship you're grieving? Not the species of not whether it's human or animal. What is the significance? What is the significance of that relationship that is contributing to you grieving so deeply? And we grieve. The intensity of our grief is correlates to the intensity of our love that we had for those that were part of our lives for however long that may be. And the curious thing about pets is we are so fearful. Many of us are so fearful about dealing with death and grief in our society. But boy, we don't even think twice about dealing with it with pets. Know we're going to outlive our pets for the most part, but yet we buy another pet, knowing that we're going to go through the same pain and loss. And for a society that is, many are fascinated by death, but don't want to confront or talk about it or want to avoid grief at all costs. There's a different set of rules when it comes to having pets as part of your companions at home.
And so, one of the things you said, Dave, really resonated with me because I think what you described is the reason why people can lose, like, somebody can, like, let's say the loss of my dad or the loss of a family member can be a different experience for each person in the family because they've had a different relationship with that person. And so, therefore, how I grieve the same person as, we might be grieving that same person. Let's say my brothers who also lost a father, but that whole experience is very different for all three of us because we had very different relationships with my father.
Mm-hmm.
And you speak my language when you speak about pets because I think that first of all the relationship we have with our pets is truly unique. I mean, we're in very few relationships that we have that are totally unconditional love, where and so I think that usually people in some way, whether it's ill-intentioned or whether it's positive, they usually have an agenda for us or with the way they think we are supposed to quote unquote live. And our pet really has no agenda except to make us happy.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's their only agenda. He's like, and so I think that very few people feel like that in their normal lives. And so that relationship with a pet is unique. And I agree with you. But yet there are people who lose a pet and then say they're never going to have another pet because they could never go through it again.
That's me.
Yeah.
After almost 50 years together, my wife and I lost our last two men folk, two old boys, a couple cats, and we'd had them, uh, got them 2 years apart, and they were just with us everywhere that we went, and it was a long goodbye for both of them because you get to a certain age and their kidneys stop functioning, and we have to give them injections of Ringer's fluid and all the rest of that. But without getting too deep into the weeds, after they passed, I had 4 or 5 friends call me up and say, "Hey, my cat just had a litter of kittens," and I said, "I appreciate where you're coming from. I don't think we're uh, in a space right now where we can invite the next heartbreak into our life.
Yeah.
We would not have had these two cats except for both of our daughters had these kitty cats and then left home. This is one of those midlife things for them where they came back, brought their cats with them, and when they left, they didn't take their kitty cats with them, so we ended up with these two boys. Now they were a ton of fun and absolutely marvelous, and I just know that after saying goodbye to over 30 kitty cats and 3 dogs over the years, at this point in our life, we're just gonna, like hang out for a minute.
Yeah. And I felt the same way, Bill, when, we have 4 cats in our house, two that were one was a gift to my daughter Janine, the other was a rescue cat that my daughter and I found, and two other rescue cats that we took when my son moved to a place that didn't allow animals. So we had 4. Each one of those cats taught me something about myself. And when Zoe transitioned the Rainbow Bridge in July of 2022, Sherry and I just said, no, we're just, and, we just didn't want to just go through the heartbreak again of losing it, of going, getting close to another animal and then experiencing that grief again. That may change, who knows? I mean, there may be a cat that may find me and that the energy and the bond is indescribable. And I'm going to have to take that cat home with me. But until that happens, um, pet loss has also been a very intricate part of my life. I've transitioned 7 animals in addition to the humans that I've lost since the age of 5 in my life, and with obviously the most life altering being the transition of my daughter. So I'm with you on that at this point. I think that ship for now has sailed.
Well,
And I'm going to like I mean my Tonka's 13 and I think about it every now and then as as I see him aging, even though in some ways he's not aging at all, but in other ways I definitely see a difference and I think about it and I don't think I could be without a dog. I mean, partly it also might be my living situation like you spoke of, so he is my companion and my, and sort of like my connection, like in so many ways. Like, I mean, basically, he helps me to get outside every day and you know, and to be out in nature where sometimes I think I might tend to, hibernate a little bit too much. So it's really a benefit for me. And I don't think that I would ever give that up. And but yeah, I mean, and I think that you have to just know that about yourself. You have to,
Mhm.
and I'm prepared. I mean, for the fact that I probably will end up, with another dog or another cat. I mean, I'm more inclined for a dog at the moment, but that might change. I've had both through the years. I've had both dogs and cats. So I love them both. So it's not like I have a bias toward one or the other, but it's more toward having company and having some other living being besides for plants in my house.
Mhm.
So
I do
so
have some friends that are really big on talking to their plants, and they name all of them, and they're pretty sure that the plants are talking back to them. And I just take them at their word, and really don't try to get too deep in the weeds, so to speak, on those types of conversations.
Well,
I
well,
got for you. We're talking about missing people who are dead and gone. Okay,
yeah,
cats and dogs are people too in my book. There's no question about that. How about the ones that had just disappeared? The people from your life that all of a sudden just weren't there anymore because they moved away. Like in your situation, Dave, being where you are in higher education for all these years, you've had students that came and went over a 4-year period or less, because things didn't work out for them. And I'm sure you've also had TAs and grad students that hung around for 8 to 10 years, and then all of a sudden they were gone. We have a different way of relating to that somehow, it seems, but it's more of the same, only different, right?
yeah. I mean, for me, it's kind of like my expectation, kind of like the rite of passage or expectation, is that once I, my students have graduated, they're going to move on. They're going to make their mark in the world, and I may or may not hear from them.
Yeah,
And I always tell them, when you can't, keep in touch. That's kind of an expectation, is that once they get involved with their own lives, they want to make their mark in the world. Obviously, they're going to be preoccupied with other stuff where they're thinking about contacting an old professor. But at the same time, the students that I do hear from, and they tell me, the positive impact I had in the classroom, and that they were thinking about me, and that they took something out of the class that they used in their own, personal or private life, or professional life. That makes me gratified to become a teacher. So that stuff doesn't really bother me as much. I think what tends to bother me more, and what bothered me a lot, was in early grief. And I'm going to go back to grief, that the people that I thought were going to step up didn't. The ones that I didn't think were going to step up did. And I had to learn that I had to be grateful for the people that were in my life, as opposed to those individuals that had walked away. And as it turns out, the individuals that had walked away, the universe was looking out for me, because their energy would have kept me stuck. But those are also associated losses that we experience as a result, due to the loss due to death, are those people that are no longer in our lives. And also the loss of future relationships, the loss of dreams for the future, everything like
right.
that. And which is why, the to me, that you can't say that grief is linear, because of the associated losses, or that go along with it: the loss of dreams, the loss of dreams for a future, the loss of relationships, the change in social circle, everything, um, that we all have to deal with, to try to rebuild this world that is now drastically different prior to the loss of our loved ones.
I think that's a pretty good description of how this huge chasm of missing shows up, and there's just reminders for you everywhere you go for a period of time. And with that said, I think what's kind of interesting to me is how people later on can look back and say, "Hey, I when I was in the deep throes of it, I didn't know if I would ever get back." You
Yeah.
know, Yeah, because it's kind of like how COVID took us all to our knees. Coming back after COVID, there was no normal to come back to. It was literally making a different existence, a different set of priorities, a different ways. For a lot of us, it was a different way to make a living, because most of the things that I was doing, in terms of working with owners of large buildings, and doing upgrades to roofing and heating systems, and energy conservation and all that kind of stuff, they didn't have any money, and there was no banking available for them either. So I had to go back to work again, doing computer
Mhm.
stuff that I, didn't really get me all that excited, and it still doesn't, because it doesn't get me in front of enough people, if you know what I mean. And I love
Mm.
hanging out with people. So I think one of the other things I wanted to mention was all the folks that have worked with me in my businesses that I've been network partners with, the things that I've done in terms of implementing state legislation, for neighborhood revitalizations across the state and all the rest of that. The great stories, that they're approximately accurate to what actually happened in many cases. And then in many cases, there's just a really good, poignant psalm to deliver about a situation or a parable in a moment that has meaning for somebody, because they're now not talking about themselves anymore. It's another poor person who's going through the same kind of trial and tribulation. But one of the neat things too, Dave, in our line of work is that when people move on, they're usually moving up in most cases, somehow or some way.
Yeah, and I think, if we position ourselves as teachers, mentors, or both, we want individuals to go out and make their mark in the world. We're not expecting that they're going to have a long lasting relationship with us.
Right.
We expect that the relationship is going to be, transient. It's going to be impermanent, for the time that that student is with you. But we hope that what they take out of the classroom, they can make their mark. And it's kind of like for a teacher, that's for me like the pay it forward philosophy. Taking what comes out of the classroom and applying it in real life and seeing the benefits that has not only to yourself but to others that you come into contact with.
Yeah. And Jan, you in particular, in terms of the way that you interact with amazing people all over the planet, through LinkedIn and some of the other things that you're doing with your online classes and discussion groups and readings, and um, how is it for you, watching folks come and go in terms of that? Because sometimes they come and stay, sometimes they come and it's a glancing blow for a time or two, and sometimes, they make a huge contribution, and then for one reason or another, they kind of go dark.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a mixed bag, and for me, at points, it is challenging, and then I have to get into a little perspective of the fact that there are people who come in for, just periods of time, shorter moments, and there are people who leave. I mean, I also find it in collaborations, which I thought were going to last far longer than they did. And then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, one decides that, kind of like, they're going to move on. And all of a sudden, they're going to do stuff on their own, being a solopreneur. Sometimes at points that's been challenging, and I kind of have to step back. And my phrase in mind is always, well, when one door closes, another door opens. And so I have to keep that in my mind at points when, especially after I find that when you have that kind of immediate time afterwards, because my tendency was always like, oh, I've got to fill this up because this feels very empty. And so I've got to, what can I do to, like, who can I find to now collaborate with, and what can I do next? And to sit back and give myself that little bit of breathing room, as uncomfortable as sometimes those moments are, and say, okay, breathe, and it'll all happen when it's supposed to happen, and step back and kind of get in a little perspective. But at points, that's been challenging.
Yeah.
That kind of emptiness, or the void, I guess. Void is a really great word. And to sit there and say to yourself, like anything, like it's okay to have an empty container for a while,
Mhm.
like to have that space be empty for a while, and then decide what you want to fill it with.
Yeah. Just a comment. That's very powerful. That wouldn't occur to most people. Bless the silence now, bless the opening, see what that's all about. And if we were to take the depths of the loss and call that disempowerment, and that getting back to some semblance of having some normalcy in your life, whatever that is, empowerment, what would you say were the tools that you may have picked up along the way that kind of move you closer over time to empowerment? That's a question for both of you.
Well, I think for me, it was realizing that I had the permission to set boundaries with who and what I wanted to experience in my life, and who and what I didn't want to experience in my life. Um, Native American, the Native American teachings of animals and nature, particularly Jamie Sam's. There's an animal, the armadillo, and if you look at the armadillo, they have this shield, this shield of armor. And I've done in my classes an exercise around armadillo medicine where I have, and this is from the Jamie Sam's book, where you take a sheet of paper, draw a circle, and within that circle are those experiences you wish to have as a within that your shield, and outside are those experiences you don't wish to have. And then we talk about those experiences, whether they're personal boundaries, material boundaries, physical boundaries. And then we talk about what's the potential for those that are within the circle to go outside of the circle. And is there a possibility that those experiences you don't wish to have come back in the circle? And a lot of times what'll happen, they'll say it depends on where I'm at in my grief journey, because what we're willing to experience at one point of our grief journey, what we're not willing to experience, we may be willing to experience depending on how much growth there is down the road. So um, I think that's one way. And then the other thing is just to give yourself permission, as Jan said, just embrace the emptiness. I mean, for me, if I wanted to sit on a couch and veg and binge watch my favorite episodes of Cold Case, I'd do that and not have guilt about it, because for me, the emptiness proved to allow me to kind of just recharge, to go within and to think about, okay, what's my next step in the progression of my ongoing growth. So there's nothing that is really truly negative or positive. It's all, everything has a yin and a yang to it. There's an upside and downside, and we can learn from everything. Carl Jung talked about the shadow element. The shadow is a person you don't want to be. It's all these characteristics that people say that aren't happiness, so therefore deny that part of your existence. Jung says embrace it. Embrace sadness, embrace anger. Look at what it has to teach you or others around you. And then that's, to me, the key to embrace genuineness, which is another way that we can empower ourselves to be the person that we wanted to be, based on our own self-imposed value system and not based on the expectations of anybody else.
How about you, Jan?
I think a few things really resonate with me well, three things I would think that were really striking to me. I think I began to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So being able to go into those points or those spaces where that emptiness was, and not being terrified of it, because I think at points that's the way people feel. They feel like it's scary. So I think that was one. So being able to look at that, I think, um and once I looked at it, realizing what, like, we talk about change and control, but what hadn't changed? Like, what was still there? And that was me, like the deepest parts of myself were always there. And so that was like, oh, okay. Well, this is, because I think that when we have those empty spaces, a lot of times we feel lost. It's kind of like, Dave spoke about. It's like, who am I now? And I think that you reevaluate and you're like, oh, okay, yes, this has changed, but still the essence of me has still remained. So that was kind of key, and that it was my choice to do it or not.
Yeah.
That it came to a conscious, like there was like a choice, like I could choose. And I'm not saying you have to choose, like, I mean, like Dave said, you could binge watch, but I think there's a difference between doing it in an unconscious way where you're not really realizing what you're doing, and doing it in a very conscious way and saying, right now, I mean, I know, but right now I'm not ready to deal with this, or I know that I have to, but it's too painful. And I'm going to just, and so it's the awareness.
Yeah.
And that's another way that we empower ourselves, is something called selective response. I mean, we don't have to talk about our particular tragedy or grief, with everybody that we meet. We can kind of empower ourselves to say, now's not the time to do this, for whatever reason. And it may be just because we don't want to talk about it. Or the second thing is that, geez, this is a relationship that I'm just developing. I'd like to see where it goes. Maybe talking about my recent losses is going to be a deal breaker for establishing anything long term. So maybe there's a better time in the relationship for them to get to know that part of me. So selective response is another way that we empower ourselves to deal with loss and tragedy.
Well, before I called on Jan to take over, I did have a couple of thoughts about what you were saying about the Jungian approach. Um, and the whole philosophy of wanting things to be different than they are, that's a very human response to things, especially when we see something in our own behavior that is not what we were intending or didn't expect. Um, but there's the whole Jungian approach is choose what you got, you know, don't try to make it something that it's not. Don't even try to understand it. Try to get familiar with the feeling,
Yep. Yep.
so that it's not something that's overtaking you. But I was also going to say that um, I think for me the key to having empowerment is the choosing.
Yep.
When you feel like you can choose something, you're no longer at the mercy of that thing that you just can't be with.
Yep.
So, and sometimes again, if it's an absolute horrible situation, you can make a choice. This is all there is for me to do here. I'm fighting with the notion that it's here. How about I just see what it is and see what it means
Mhm.
for a little while? Don't have to do it forever, but the best I can for just right now.
Well, and here's the other thing about empowerment. Empowerment can go the other way. People can make a choice not to stay stuck. They can make a choice not to move forward. And when I say that in some circles, I'll get like, "Are you on? Do you need to like pee in a cup?" Look when I say that. Um, but it's very true. I mean, we can choose to we can use pain as pain of loss as an opportunity for growth you know for an opportunity of growth at a personal and on a perspective on a assumptive world level, or we can use it to stay stuck. Um, and it's because human beings are born with free will, so we have the free will to empower ourselves or disempower ourselves, and um, that's something that I think that side needs to be also acknowledged as well too.
Well, the interesting thing about that disempowerment side is in many cases, it's a lot like grabbing a live wire or sticking a fork into an outlet,
Hmm.
and you don't realize you made the choice to put your fork there. You can
Yeah.
make the choice to let go of it, but as your body is, getting jolted, and it takes a little bit of, I think, work to get to the point where people can actually even embrace the idea that they do have choice.
Yeah. Well, and I think really in grief, do feel disempowered because of what loss does physically, what it does cognitively, what it does psychologically, and every loss is going to that is going to have that same universal experience no matter what. It doesn't matter how many losses you've had, you're going to go through all the physical and the psychological changes. And I think for some individuals, they may confuse disempowerment with hanging on to the pain. If they hang on to the pain long enough, this way they're always going to remember their loved ones. Well, we can remember our loved ones through happy memories as well too, not just hanging on to the pain or being afraid of having joy because we feel that we're going to dishonor the memory of our loved ones. I mean, joy, pain, sadness, it's a microcosm of all the emotions we experience. It creates like this mosaic pathway that, of all the emotions that we walk. And it's just, the way it is, the way God intended us to be. We create it. We have every emotion, every possible thought in the universe, and we are in service to each other because we can mirror that to each other. And I'm not taking that. That's not something I'm going to credit myself with. That's out of Debbie Ford's book, the Dark Side of the Light Chasers, and she takes off on Jung's shadow element to come up with a whole different personal and self-help perspective in terms of how to use shadow to improve the quality of your life.
Well, I always love that conversation where God is saying to Adam and Eve, "I gave you free will,"
Yeah,
and they said, "Well, what does that mean?" He said, "I don't know, and I wouldn't tell you if I did.
that's right.
Go have some fun."
Yeah, find out for yourself.
But one of the things you said about choice is sometimes, and I think that that's why I always gravitated to the way I practice yoga, because it was always this sort of experiment of basically trying things on, of like, and feeling it in your body. So it was kind of like doing a pose a particular way and then saying, that just doesn't feel right, and trying it differently and saying, oh no, that was a big mistake. And then, and playing with that, that's why I always like that kind of idea of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's kind of like this play of like you dip your toe in and you go, okay, that's okay or whatever, but maybe I can go in a little deeper, and you keep on playing with that. I mean, people use different ways to do it. I used, a very physical way to have that experience, and it has always served of great value to me because it's this opportunity that I would get to practice that on a daily basis, where I could
Mhm.
sit there and say, okay, well, today I'm going to play with this and see what that feels like to me. And there are days I made monstrous mistakes and got hurt. And then there were other days where you kind of err on the side of caution and you're like, okay, well, yesterday I hurt myself. Today I don't want to hurt myself. So maybe I don't do it as much or whatever. And it's this constant, but yeah, you're doing it all the time. So that when life gives you that experience, or you have to have an opportunity where you're kind of playing in normal everyday existence, you know what it feels like.
But what I really love about what you're saying is that that whole conversation about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, it's like, everybody wants to jump to wisdom. The old saying, where does wisdom come from? Well, wisdom comes from experience. Where does experience come from? Uh, Good, bad judgment, whatever. So the point is that I think I left a step out in there, but the point is that you have to get through something the first time to know that it's not going to be the end of your existence.
Yeah.
Then when you know that it's not an existential threat, you're more willing to do something that seems like that again. And then as time goes on, you're constantly finding your way back to equilibrium or
Yeah.
balance.
I think the pain that we experience from any tragedy, if we allow it, it can teach us something. It can allow us to find our greater purpose. If again, if we allow that to happen, and um, the other thing is that, you know, Jan mentioned being comfortable with the uncomfortable. I've always believed that the best work that we do to become more aware of our relationship to ourselves and the world around us, or spiritual awareness, is not so much where you have these periods of enlightenment where some angelic celestial being is going to come down with a big trumpet and say, and do doo, 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 where you got this. It's doing the messy work. It's getting to the parts of ourselves that are uncomfortable. And the best spiritual growth that occurs is when we're willing to dive into the messy and come to peace with that, and also learn what it can teach us about ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm still waiting for that angel with the trumpet. I've yet to see one.
If I see that, Bill, you'll be the first one I call.
We'll co-write a book on that, Dave.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
But I
Um,
agree with you. The blood and guts physical world is where the training takes place. Avoiding it just lengthens the amount of training you're going to have to take. So
well, what we learn in the physical world is whether or not we know it or believe it or buy into it is ultimately for the good of the evolution of our souls anyway.
yeah,
But at the time, it's harder for us to see that because we're too busy living the human experience and the pain that is inherent to a lot of what happens to us in the human experience to see the greater purpose and what until we get farther along and we avail ourselves of some wise mentors, support spiritual mentors who could help us see the greater purpose beyond what we've experienced in the human form.
yeah. Jan, you have a thought?
I know I was just sitting with what you guys were saying, and I think that to me, I think about those times and that processing, and you talk about wisdom, and I think a lot of that comes from, like that period of reflection. And you might say that quiet after something or the emptiness, but it is the reflection afterwards and taking a moment to truly be present. And I'm doing a program right now, and that's what we talked about yesterday. It's like this the tendency for many of us is to think about what's next all the time.
Yeah,
I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do this next, and then I'm going to do that, and so we're constantly like, we're never in an experience for any lengthy period of time because we're always thinking about what's next, and either what we're going to do next or what the next step is. where we haven't really been in that for the step we're in,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
No,
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense, and particularly in a society we live in that focuses on productivity and achievement, it's like, we don't allow ourselves to just kind of savor the moment and say, "Boy, this was a great accomplishment." We're thinking about the next best thing. And particularly when you're in that age range, I think of 25 to 44, that's when you want to make your mark. It's always what's the next best thing, and you don't give yourselves time to savor what you've already accomplished.
Well, see, there's another thing here too. Is Joseph Campbell's, the hero's journey, where it's a helix, but built into the journey is the preparation before you start. And we're not talking about necessarily, Hercules or one of the other mythological journeys, but for our journey, if we can break down what we're doing in life into these steps, where you plan it, you gather everything you need to do it, you execute it, you complete the execution on it, you win or you lose, but then you take time to reflect. That reflection time to both, get a lesson if there is one there, and maybe some ideas, new ideas to carry forward into the next time, but also to recover yourself, to get yourself back up to full fighting strength again, so that you're not going segue to segue to segue to segue, and never having that sense of ever completing anything and never knowing when it's going to be done in the future. But if you map it out in such a way where you can stop and catch a breath afterwards, reflect on it a little bit, and then choose to get started as opposed to just segueing into it automatically.
Mhm.
When you learn that at 25, you become a very powerful human being in the world.
I'm reminded of the book by Dan Millman. I can't remember the title, but in it he says that there are no ordinary moments. And
No.
so and so I think if you start to look at, not only kind of reflect on the circumstance you're in for like, but also to celebrate, to speak to Dave's original point, because I don't know that we pause enough to actually recognize a lot of the time what we've done. I was
Mhm.
speaking to somebody yesterday who said he got he's publishing a book and got approached by, a really big publisher. So he just finished the first draft. And so he said that, oh my gosh, like here I am, I'm thinking about that first draft. And he said, the old me probably said, okay, well, that means I have to like start to work on the layout and I have to go to the second draft. And all of a sudden he sat back and said, like, that was a huge accomplish. Let me just kind of take in the fact that I completed the whole first draft of the book.
Mhm.
And I don't know that we offer ourselves or allow ourselves that very often in our, especially like Dave said, in our society where we're pro- very productive oriented, or very, and everything is about productivity and and the next best step and the promotion and the whatever else you're going to get from that. And I don't know that we actually take a moment to appreciate where we are and acknowledge what we've done.
And I think the other thing, Jan, is that I think society's emphasis on productivity also comes with the message that you have to be perfect. And I tell my students, you the entry level grade for you to get an A is 93%. That means you have a 7% margin of error. So excellence doesn't require perfection.
Yeah, never sacrifice perfection at the expense of good.
That's right. Um,
Because sometimes good enough is good enough right now, although that's not the long-term goal. But you have to complete things every once in a while, and they have to fall short so you can get the lesson.
well, and it also reflects on what Don Miguel Ruiz said in the Four Agreements is, well, just strive to do your best. And I'm paraphrasing that, but and sometimes our best is different depending on the circumstances. Like if I got time, I'll share you a real quick story about this with one of my students. This is real quick. Her father was diagnosed with cancer during the semester that she was taking a course with me, so she missed a lot of classes, and she was very apologetic. And I'm thinking to myself, well, look, I know what it's like being in a cancer fight because with my own daughter. So she ended up getting like a B or a B plus for the course, And she lamented, saying, Dave, I really felt disappointed because I really felt I could have done better. I said, given what you had to deal with, the fact that you got a B, I think she got a B or a B plus. For the fact that you got that, that's like an A in my book, considering what you were dealing with. You're
Yeah.
dealing with a life and death situation. And with cancer, there's either, when you hear the term, it's either am I going to live or am I going to die? So she's dealing with that with her father, and yet trying to also work full time and go to school full time. And I said, considering what you were dealing with, that B is like an A in my book. So show yourself some grace.
Yeah. Yeah, that just implies the whole notion of multitasking, which is a made up. It's part of the shadow. Let's put it that way. It
Mhm.
doesn't really exist, but it's not also a crime to have a moment or two that you're taking for yourself. And
That's right.
I do know people who, when the moment they get off of a vacation, they schedule their next one. It does two things for them. It actually builds some time out into the future, and it gives them something to look forward to.
Mhm.
And they don't. Nobody wants to go on a vacation exhausted. Have you ever noticed that? So they tend to take better care of themselves in the in between time as well.
Yeah, makes sense.
So empowerment kind of comes in flashes and waves, right?
Mhm.
And then it's like it's opening and it's closing and it's opening and it's closing. How you experience every moment is really the assault of the 80,000 thoughts that we have per day. And I think for most of it, they're not necessarily our most, shall we call it, enlightened thinking. More often than not, it's something that we need to be aware of or be afraid of or be concerned about. Or so the whole notion of being able to stand in there with those thoughts long enough to sort them and to give yourself the room to take a moment or two until the emotional aspect, because you're going to get a subliminal response to things that are upsetting to you. And in most cases we don't take the time to go any further than noticing that, yeah, I'm upset. And if you can say that, that's presencing it for the moment. But then a lot of people will take a lot of time trying to figure out why they're upset. And I think there's a one size fits all. The answer to that is because you're a human being. And it's the nature of all of us to think that there's something wrong around here somewhere. Something wrong with me, something wrong with the system, something wrong with you. Give that up and allow those thoughts to go sit in the corner and get the work done. But don't tell them that have plenty of time for those thoughts later. You can come back and haunt me all you want to, but just not right now.
Mhm.
Make your own empowerment, in other words. Get to be you know anything that you do, martial arts, yoga, psychology, these are all things that are empirically based on having done the work of something before to get to the point where you're thinking and behaving and believing different. And if your belief system is something that's empowering you, I think that's really, it works automatically that way. Not that
Mhm.
it's correct, not that beliefs are correct necessarily, but they're going to give you some impetus in the world and help you carry you through some tight spots if you're working on making yourself healthy and whole.
I mean, everybody's belief system is different. Um, there's so many different holistic practices, spiritual practices, different schools of thought, different religions that people can just pick and choose from. That everybody's belief system is going to be different. It's not doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just it's theirs, and
Yes.
it's up to us to be able to understand their belief system, see where we align with it or don't align with it, but hold space for that respectfully.
Sure. And when I refer to belief system, I'm not speaking, dogmatically or
No.
ideologically. I'm thinking where you are sure that something is true.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what it is. Anything that that's your belief because you're stating it as an absolute. And the one thing that human beings learn after a time is there are no absolutes in this world. Hence, we have no control.
Yeah. And I've also learned that there's certain things that science can't explain, but yet I know to be true.
Yes, there's all of that too.
That too, but I do think that if you talk about beliefs, I think there are people who walk around like I have some beliefs I know that are like that, not even that I don't, but I know are untrue, but I can't like are very hard for me to let go of. And so I think we also do have false beliefs. based on our environment and what we've been told and what we've been taught. And, I think there are beliefs that people have about themselves when you speak to them, which, if you were to think about it, like, I think about some of the ones that I thought about myself, which I realized at a certain point, like, these make no sense. But, I think it took me it took me a while to get to that space at some point or another. I was like, if I believe this about myself, why do I believe it about myself and not about other people? And so I think that beliefs are interesting, and it's an interesting word.
Well, I'm actually still, just to go back for a moment, distinguishing faith from belief. A faith is something that you know you believe, okay? But most of the beliefs that are in your way are things you don't know, and are unwilling to find out what it is that's causing you conflict because you keep bumping into the same thing over and over again. And
Mhm.
that's where the choice comes in.
Well, and the other thing is that I think individuals may be reluctant to embrace beliefs that they believe are at odds with their core belief system because they believe, well, I have to substitute these new beliefs for my core beliefs, and that's not the case. It's
Yeah.
basically it's expanding and adding to, and it's not in addition to, it's instead of. And that's something that I learned in conversations, numerous conversations with my friend and mentor, Reverend Patty Farino. We talked about critical thinking. We talked about, and it's belief expansion. Um, and we can empower ourselves to say, okay, this I can take this part of this belief system and incorporate it and leave the rest. And that's where it becomes empowering, where we get to choose. And we don't. And I think people's fear of relinquishing what's new to them, or
Yep.
what's familiar to them, prevents them from embracing something new. And actually, when you expand your belief system, it just opens up a whole new world for you. Belief expansion helped me eventually find peace with my daughter's transition,
Sure.
Yeah, but I guess I'm thinking,
among other things.
but I guess I was thinking of belief as much more about things you believe about yourself. And then that way, like what you believe you're capable of or what you believe about yourself, which often is wrong.
Yeah.
Eh,
And
And so I'm not talking about beliefs in something like you said, Dave, where I mean, I know there are, let's say, holistic modalities that I don't totally understand, but I know they work.
Yeah.
yeah,
And so, coming from a very scientific oriented person, science based person, that was always, and finally, I was just like, I don't need to know everything. Like, I don't need to understand why. I just know it works. Like, I don't need to
Mhm.
know the reason why it works. It
but
works.
what I love about the different ways that we're saying this is we come back to your becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right.
Embracing the what I don't know is that's the edge. That's that, that sort of the edge of the bubble where now what you're really finding out is I do have a belief in this area, and my belief is I can't do this. And
Yep.
it may become unconcealed in a situation where you're actually building your own pathway to whatever it is that you truly want in the moment. And almost all of us are trying to find a place where there's stasis. You
Yeah.
just are like
Oh,
everything's cool again, right?
yeah. And exactly what Jan mentioned about what we believe about ourselves. There's a teaching in my favorite book on The Afterlife of Billy Fingers by Annie Kagan, where the teaching from Billy is that society teaches limitation, not potential. So people buy into what they can't do and they believe, well, I can't do this, when in reality, they're buying into a narrative that's based on somebody else's probably arbitrary beliefs about what they can do. So what I tell my students is that I don't care what your past history has been in other classes, what your grades are. I'm going to treat you as if you're capable of doing great things, because otherwise you're shortchanging. Now I'm shortchanging you. Now, if you buy into that, that's up to you. But I'm always going to treat you as if you can reach your greatest potential and do your greatest work in my class. Whether or not you buy into it, that's up to you. But that's the perspective that I will bring to this classroom and with my students.
I mean, I'm working on a book right now. I'm contributing to a book. And part of it is that we're talking about our environments and how we were, like, how we grew up and how that influenced the people. In some ways, that's part of it, and how it influenced the people we became. And, after writing this chapter and kind of you realize how much of what you were told, and even if you didn't let it hinder, like, let's say, I'm the first, like, I'm a solopreneur. My parents always had much steadier jobs, didn't have that. They didn't have that entrepreneurial type, like, type, let's say, gene. And so the whole idea of being in your own business and what that means and the effort and all that kind of stuff, like, they really don't, like, never could understand. And that was also very fear based. It was called to, like, well,
Yeah.
don't do that because you never know what might happen. Like, why don't you go out and find something that's a little bit more consistent, a little bit more steady, all these different messages, which was really coming from them and their fear, and not
Mhm.
really, was not really about me at all. It was really about them and what they felt comfortable with. And so I think that, that's what we have to realize about our own belief systems, how much of it came from, like I said, what we were told or the environment we were brought up in.
Yeah. And early experience does matter.
Sure does.
Exactly.
And if you're stuck, as you said before, and choosing to be stuck, a lot of us make that decision to be stuck and forget we make it.
Mhm.
So we're still sitting there in a stuck state,
Well,
knowing, knowing this doesn't have to be this way, but why am I not, start having those questions. Why am I not doing something? Why am I not doing what I know to be the thing to do?
and we end up putting ourselves in situations that, to help allow us to relive the trauma too.
Yep.
And I think Freud had mentioned something. I was reading this in a book called Into the Soul of the World by Brad Wetzler, is that we unconsciously gravitate to the situations that traumatize us, and I'm paraphrasing this, in the attempt to heal. But it's like Einstein's definition of insanity. We do the same thing over and over, expecting to get different results.
Right. Right. But there is something very attractive about things that are familiar.
Yeah.
And that being the case, we know the way in and we know the way back out. We survived every one of those failures and we were able to live with it. And that's just not putting you on the road to greatness, is it?
No.
No, but I always say, it's really it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. And this
Yes.
feeling of, like, this may be rotten, but I know this rotten.
Yeah.
you know.
And if we experience something that isn't rotten, individuals who come from unhealthy backgrounds because they don't believe they deserve anything other than rottenness will find a way to self sabotage anything that's good.
Manufacturing rottenness as a way of being. I like
Yeah. Yeah.
it.
Yeah. There's a chapter for another book. So,
Now you're
Manufacturing
talking.
of that.
Well, lady and gentlemen, we're kind of at that point now where it would be useful to summarize a little bit. And Dave, since you're our guest this week, have you got any thoughts you want to leave the folks at home with?
yeah, there is a quote in a book, and I mentioned the book Into the Soul of the World by Brad Wetzler earlier. There is a quote that to me is the ultimate message of empowerment for anybody that has come from a dysfunctional family. And I'm going to see if I can remember this. This is something that it's in the book, and his therapist told him this. Um, you are not the child of your parents any longer. You are a child of this world, a child of this universe, a child of God. And I got emotional reading that, because anybody that's ever come from a dysfunctional family and has thought they were less than, that is like something that is like, wow, you know, you want to talk about empowerment and realizing that you are not the person whose family you were born into. You are more than that, and
Yeah,
you are part of something greater. That's something that, um, I just got emotional reading, and I would almost going to write his therapist and say, I wish I had thought of that. But that's something that has really just resonated with me this past week.
sure. Miss Jan?
Um, I don't know if there's anything specific that comes to mind. Um, the past few weeks, I've been focusing a lot on self kindness, and so kindness to self. So I've been focused on, you know, directing kindness and kind self-talk to myself. And that's been my mode of empowerment over the last like few weeks. Yeah, that's been my path.
Absolutely love what both of you have said. Every last one of us on the face of the planet feels less than in some circumstances. And about the smartest thing you can ever do is to take those thoughts and share them with someone you trust. Get into a conversation with someone who has no stake in your game other than the fact that they may think you're a great person and love you. But be willing to just share your thoughts out loud, and be also willing for that person who hears you to not think you're crazy or that you may need to pee into a cup, so to speak.
Hey, as a former addictions counselor, that's always the first thing that comes into my head. So
That's right. That's right. Are you experimenting with something around here?
that's right. Yeah, if somebody
Well,
told me, yeah, if somebody told me over 22 years ago I'd be believing in non-ordinary phenomenon and signs and reincarnation and past lives, I would have looked at them and said, "Okay, wrap a drug screen now." You
yeah,
know,
exactly.
but
And
I,
you can't meet a friend on the way.
no, you can't be. Yeah, that's right. And but how things have changed.
They have, and they should. We always have an opportunity to upgrade our knowledge, and our knowledge does inform our beliefs. So you have no choice but to have your knowledge inform your beliefs. So keep getting more knowledge if you can.
Absolutely.
That's what I've got. So I want to thank you again, both of you, Dave and you, Jan, for once again engaging us in a very, I think, a wonderful conversation this week. I very much enjoyed it. And all you folks at home, I'm going to leave you with this thought, as I have and Jan has for over the past year. I'm going to start it, and Jan, I'd like you to finish it, okay? So after we're done here and you stop listening, would you please reach out to a friend of yours?
Just tell them how much you appreciate them and that you are so happy that they are a part of your life. You can do this via text, messenger, phone call, whatever way you feel comfortable. And if that doesn't work, then just send them some energetic, good vibes.
I like the note wrapped around a rock through the picture window too. That whatever it takes to get somebody's attention, that you love them. Thank you. God bless all of you. Thank you so much. And we are lighting the candle, a world that works. Go out and have some fun.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.